Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would do a follow-up video to the video I did the other day demonstrating just the difference of how I look over the course of a year and answer some of the questions about it, because it has raised some valid questions that people have, and I think it's only fair that I address those. So let me put on my +5 out of Speechcraft and let's talk about this. And the reason I made that video is that someone I know who watches my training clips said, you really should do a side-by-side of maybe how you look shirtless in that video where you did curling over a year ago versus how you look now, because they're dramatically different. And they are, and even those are only 15 pounds body weight apart. And it kind of raises the question of a lot of people saying, hey, did you only lose 15 pounds in a year? Which, no, I lost 40 pounds in way less than a year. But I'm done cutting. I'm not really planning on cutting again. I'm just going to recomp like I'm doing now. But there's a different timeline for that. People who go back and check my DEXA scans can see that I started at 255. Right, I was halfway through that cut with that shirtless video. I was already 20 pounds in. So I was even fatter before that. And I was over 20% body fat there after losing 20 pounds. And the point is, I got down to 215 for the final DEXA scan, and then I'm up to 220 again now. And I haven't really bulked. It's just that your weight's going to fluctuate over a course of a year. I don't think it's unreasonable for your body weight to fluctuate 5 pounds in a year. And I'm probably at the heaviest now that I have been in 10 months, but only by a few pounds. But I haven't gained any body fat, and that's been the point, is that, and I'll probably drift back down a little bit, just at the same calories as I gain muscle. I'll probably drift back down towards 215 eventually, and I'll just stay in that range, and that's more or less my goal. But it's raised the question of, why don't you just cut to the desired body fat and then lean bulk back up? And that's a great question, and let's go back over and let's look at valid criticisms that people have had of me. An invalid criticism is, say, Blaha's been cutting for whatever years and whatever, because that's not true. I've done a few cuts, but I've not been cutting continually for even a year straight ever. And I've never claimed to be, and hopefully anyone who thinks that doesn't actually follow my channel, because they would know that that's not the case. That's trolling. A real criticism is Jason never stays at a reasonably low body fat. He always tends to go back up. All right. That's a valid criticism, right? I mean, if we set stupid trolling and bullshit and all that aside, that would actually be a fair criticism, and I will accept that criticism. And my rebuttal to that is, well, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now, because I've successfully avoided that situation. Right? Because I was down to 17% body fat on my DEXA scan in December, and I have stayed at that point or lower pretty much the entirety of this year. The entirety of this year. So for 9 or 10 months, I haven't been above that. And I don't plan on going back above that. In fact, I will slowly get leaner over time. But the question that comes back over is, why does that happen? And the truth is, for people like me, and for the majority of people out there, bulking and cutting doesn't work. The whole bodybuilder concept of cutting down really lean in a reasonably short period of time, say 6 months, is really stupid. It's stupid. You want examples of why it's stupid for the majority of people other than a psychological minority of people who can handle it? I mean, perfect example, Greg Doucette seems to be able to handle it just fine. Do you guys understand how rare that is? You need to understand how rare that is, because everybody else gets fat. Everyone else blows back up. I'm going to have to cover Christian Guzman. I'm going to look at his video. I haven't even seen it yet, but he just had an issue with that. He rebounded immediately. Nick Wright rebounded immediately. Edema. Even Chris Jones rebounds. And Chris Jones gets pretty damn lean. Or as he calls it, hoe ready. He rebounds. Every one of these guys who do these cuts of, oh, let's lose a pound of body fat a week and then get shredded, what happens? Every single one of them regain 30 pounds. What's happened every time I lose a pound a week? I regain 30 pounds also. I just don't get as lean as they do. But the effect is the same. And it has to do with our set points. You're going to tend to rebound back to your set points and maybe slightly fatter every time you cut fast. My set point is over 20% body fat. For some of those guys, their set point might be 16% body fat or 17%. My set point's probably 25%. Let's just be honest about that. When you have different set points that your body gets used to, your appetite will throw you back to that, and you will binge and everything else if you diet too strictly too long. And I mean by strictly, I don't mean eating a clean diet. I'm not talking about, oh, you eat good and track. I mean strictly as in you're losing weight consistently. And I'm talking a pound or more a week. You do that for an extended period of time, you will eventually have a psychological break. And it's hormonal in your brain. It has nothing to do with willpower. It just has to do with the psychology and brain chemistry going on. And what has happened for me historically, I've always tried to use that stupid model of let me just cut down, let me cut down, let me do a cut. I'm not psychologically wired for that. And part of what everyone needs to understand, a lot of people are not psychologically wired for that. And when you take that route and you're not wired for it, the end result's disastrous. It doesn't ever work out. Almost never does it work out. I'm an example. Some of these other guys are examples. I mean, let's be honest, even Nick Wright's an example. Nick Wright's an example. So what do we do about it? You change your lifestyle. Instead of saying, hey, I'm going to do cuts, how about I just recomp? Because at the end of the day, an advanced strength athlete, an advanced lifter, and by advanced, people need to understand, when I use the word advanced, I don't mean elite, because people confuse the two. You know what an advanced lifter is? Someone who's been training hard for 3 to 5 years, really hard, and they've tapped out most of their drug-free gains, their natural gains, or they're at a point to where maybe they've gotten pretty advanced and came off gear or whatever. When you reach a point to where you're going to gain muscle very, very slowly and strength very slowly, and you've built a base, you can bench over 300 pounds, you can deadlift over 500 pounds, or you're pretty well an advanced lifter, okay? You're an advanced lifter. Your gains are going to come slow. You might not really even get much out of bulking at that point. As long as your training is really, really good, you're recovering from your training, you're eating large amounts of protein, you're not in a calorie deficit, you're probably going to be able to make the majority of the gains that you're going to make. You're probably not going to gain significantly more by bulking at that point. You really aren't. So if you don't really need the surplus, and you can slowly kind of adjust body fat as you go, like little maybe phases of a little bit of lean bulking. And when I mean lean bulking, I mean you gained a pound in a month, a pound in 6 weeks, and then your weight might drift back down through a slow cut. So recomposition doesn't mean you recomp literally every week. It just means you stay in the basic range where you're at least not gaining any significant body fat with your muscle gains, and the muscle gains are slow, then maybe you lose a little fat, just kind of shifting back and forth in that range. Recomposition, it doesn't always happen on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, but it happens maybe in phases of that. They aren't even dedicated. Like you're just generally eating around maintenance. You're eating a high protein diet. Your training is dialed in. You will probably have weeks where you gain muscle and don't lose fat. You'll probably have weeks where you lose a tiny drop of fat and don't gain muscle. It's all going to revolve around it. And if you kind of stay in that situation, what ends up happening is that things become sustainable. And that's what I've done. Because if I just did another cut again, because here's what would happen. If I did another hard push after that last cut where I dropped down the weight and have kept it off, I would rebound again. I know myself, I know my psychology, I know my brain chemistry at this point. I would rebound and I would end up at 250 pounds. All that work would go to waste. What am I doing now? Well, I'm recompositioning. Yeah, I do a keto diet, but I recomp and I stay at pretty much maintenance calories, roughly maintenance. Maybe I go over it for a week, a hair over. Maybe I have a week where I go a hair under. But it's only by 100 calories or two. Because it's really hard to track it. You can't track that perfectly. You can't track it perfectly. You just got to be close enough. And the whole point there is that it becomes a lifestyle and you get used to it and it becomes habit. It becomes habit. And then when it becomes a habit and your body gets used to it and your set points change, you don't have these big shifts in appetite. You don't have these big shifts in energy. You don't have the performance loss. And that's kind of the direction I would say most strength athletes need to go. Let's be realistic here. Strength athletes, other than maybe their first year, they might want to bulk their first year in the gym, get up to a desirable body weight. Probably when you realize that you're pretty close to the weight class that you need to be at for your height, I would say most strength athletes need to just focus on being as stacked as possible in their weight class. What does that mean? That means if you decide that at your height you need to be in the 198, the 220, the 242, whatever it happens to be, you should just stay in that class. Gain muscle and lose fat back and forth a little bit over time and just kind of stay in that class. That might mean phases of lean bulking It might be in phases of recomp, but you don't ever really probably want to do big bulks and cuts because it will disrupt your training, it will disrupt your performance, it will mess with your mindset, because that's the other big thing. When you have already issues with food, unhealthy relationships with food, and I do, and I've discussed in the past why I do, it has to do with my own childhood, I acknowledge that. But you can't always fix those things. But what you can do is devise strategies to improve your lifestyle around it. Right? It's just like if someone is a drug addict, they will be an addict the rest of their life. But they can adjust their lifestyle in such a way that it doesn't become a problem for them again. If you're a drug addict, you probably don't need to hang around with people who are using drugs. I mean, that's a perfect example. You adjust your lifestyle accordingly, because that addiction is never going to go away. And sometimes when you have serious unhealthy relationships with food, with insane appetites and binge eating issues, you just have to adjust your lifestyle to make sure that it doesn't become an issue for you. And in a case of something like this, you can do that. And in this case, I don't ever have to deal with the psychological issue of lost strength because I just lost a bunch of weight. Because then you're going to have another external situation that's going to motivate you to want to bulk again. And then when subconsciously you want to bulk again to gain strength, and you have an unhealthy relationship with food and very, very high appetite, and your brain wants to binge because you've pushed it too low in terms of losing too much weight too quickly, what happens? You binge. So really, for strength athletes, and particularly ones who've ever been heavy at any point in their life, probably not the best of ideas to do that. And so here's what I'm doing. I'm doing this and it's working. My strategy is working, and I decided I would really address it further once I got to a point to where people are really noticing, because they are really noticing at this point. The strategy is working. It's viable. It's viable. I am doing it. I am achieving it. It is going along. Is it going fast? No. But is it working? Yes. And reasonable people can see that at this point. There's always going to be detractors and people who say, no, 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 and they'll come in the comments and I'll ban them, and, who cares? They're delusional or they're just trolls. People see it at this point. And so, if I'm going to continue this strategy, I think it'll work. It's going to work for me in the long term, and it comes down to, instead of thinking in terms of bulking and cutting, it's more of a situation of, hey, I probably need to stay at this similar body weight. I can gain or lose a little bit of weight here and there. Focus on keeping my training on point, keeping my diet in check, not eating a bunch of garbage, following the sort of diet I need to follow, making sure my protein is really high, eating at maintenance calories so that I have enough fuel to train on, to gain muscle on, to recover from my training, but not to gain body fat. All right, and it's just that balancing act, and focusing on that and focusing on performance in that situation will over time recomposition you. And if I continue to do that, as I've done very much this year, if I keep doing that for another year, what's going to happen? It should work out pretty well. But I've been happy with it, and I think it's a viable strategy, and it's a good alternative for a little bit more advanced lifters, and in some cases novice type lifters, who know that bulking and cutting probably isn't right for them, and who don't ever want to rebound. They don't want to deal with the binge eating issue that comes after a very serious hard cut. And it works, and eventually you will get to where you want to be in terms of leanness. And I've noticed that even the powerlifters who I know who stay really lean, they don't bulk and cut. They stay lean for 5 years straight. They don't do this bodybuilder, let me get peeled and then bulk back up. They stay at 10% body fat for 5 years. They don't go try to cut down to 6. They don't bulk back up to 15. They just stay there. And they do it by staying on point with their diet and their training. And it really is that simple. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.